Hi, I'm Jack Buffington for robotbrigade.com. This is another video in my series of videos about the mapping robot that I am building. And in this video, I'm going to talk about my Raspberry Pi setup. I chose to work with the Raspberry Pi 4B, and this is because I wanted to just pick the most powerful, easily obtainable Raspberry Pi to use. You can get these just about anywhere. My initial impulse was to try to use the Raspberry Pi 0W. I know that it would be capable of doing it, but I didn't want to initially burden myself with having to simultaneously figure out how to make things work as well as to make it work within the constraints of that system. I have installed the Ubuntu 2004 server OS on there, and I have set it up in a headless manner, so that means if you hook up a monitor, it does not show anything on the screen for the most part other than a little bit of text at boot. I chose to make it headless just to save a little bit more on RAM and system resources. I have ROS 2 Foxy installed, and that is the reason that I went with Ubuntu instead of Raspbian, is that ROS 2 prefers to run under Ubuntu. There are a few things that I did additionally to the system. The first is that I found that the system was taking a little too long to boot. And so I found a utility that allowed me to determine how long each service was taking to start up, or what was taking time when the system was booting. And I looked at that list and got rid of a lot of things dealing with waiting for the network to come up. That seemed to be taking the most amount of time. So I'm using a Wi-Fi USB dongle to get my internet service. And it took a while for that to start up. So by eliminating the things that were waiting, that sped things up quite a lot. And I think I'm down to about 20 seconds to boot. I have some reservations with how I am currently connecting to the microcontroller board. I'm using the default labeled GPIO pins on the GPIO header to communicate to my serial port on my microcontroller board. But the problem with that I found is that U-boot is using that at boot time, as well as there's a serial console that goes to that serial port. Now, I am aware that there are other serial ports that I can access through this GPIO port. However, I just chose that one at the beginning, and I've kind of been dealing with the issues of having done that. I've disabled the serial console, but getting U-boot disabled is a little bit more of a process. So I haven't done that, and instead I'm choosing to just ignore serial input for the first, I think, 11 or 13 seconds after boot. Let's look at the pinout here of the header. I'm going to switch over to my computer now. I am connecting to the microcontroller board using these pins right here. Zoom in a little bit better. All the pins that are in boxes I am using. So to supply power to the Raspberry Pi, I am using these two 5-volt lines and these two grounds. These two pins are the pins that I'm using for serial, and they have the issue that I just described. This pin right here, I am running all the way over to here. This is my auxiliary header, and I'm using that to detect if the Raspberry Pi is powered up or not. When it is on, this pin goes high. When it's off, it goes low, obviously. So I currently have my microcontroller board set up so that, let me try to get zoomed out right. If it detects that that pin on the Raspberry Pi header has gone low, it sends a low signal over to this chip, which is my power control chip, and that turns off power to the whole system. I could have other behavior, but that's what I currently have programmed. Other than that, that's what I've done to set up the Raspberry Pi. I would have given better, more detailed instructions. However, I took a few false starts in my initial setup and don't know the exact programs and steps that I took. My experience has been that when you are trying to hone a install, it can take quite a while to do, so I'm going to leave that to you. I had never installed ROS2 on Ubuntu Server 2004 with the various issues that I've done, but I fumbled my way through it and I got there, and I'm going to assume that you can do the same thing. So hopefully this is helpful. It's not very detailed, but it did tell you what steps I took. So for robotbrigade.com, I'm Jack Buffington.